Daily news and analysis. We keep you informed and inspired.
This is World Today.
Hello and welcome to World Today. I'm Ding Hen in Beijing. Coming up, China and Hungary vow to deepen all-round cooperation. China's Mengzhou space vessel passes a key test for 2030 crewed moon mission with Long March 10 rocket. China is calling on Lithuania to adhere to One China principle after Lithuania signaled potential change on the Taiwan question. And breaking with President Donald Trump, the U.S. House votes to pass a bill ending Canada tariffs. To listen to this episode again or to catch up on previous episodes, you can download our podcast by searching World Today. First up, Chinese Foreign Minister Wang Yi has met with Hungarian Prime Minister Viktor Orban in Budapest, reaffirming that China will remain a reliable and long-term strategic partner for Hungary. The senior Chinese diplomat welcomed Hungary to continue riding the quote-unquote fast train of Chinese modernization to share its development opportunities. Orban, for his part, said that Chinese investment and the upcoming launch of the Hungary-Serbia Railway have significantly boosted Hungary's economic development. He welcomed more Chinese companies to invest in Hungary. The two sides have agreed to deepen cooperation, jointly work for the sound development of the China-European Union ties, and enhance collaboration in terms of global governance. So for more, joining us now on the line is Han Hua, co-founder and Secretary General of Beijing Club for International Dialogue. So thank you very much for joining us today, Han Hua. First of all, why do you think the Hungarian government led by Prime Minister Orban has pursued a long-standing friendly policy towards China?
Thank you for having me. I think Hungary occupies a very unique position within the European Union. It is a landlocked country. It is an EU member. It has to abide by the EU institutional structures. It often, especially by this prime minister, it often articulates a very independent strategic voice on foreign policy, particularly with regard to Russia, China, and some broader East-West dynamics. So that's why in recent years, Hungary has become one of China's most important partners in Central and Eastern Europe. Chinese investments in many electronic vehicle manufacturings, like the battery production infrastructure, has also made Hungary a very key position in China-EU, especially China-Europe industrial cooperation. So I think these, one is from the strategic perspective, the other is from the industrial and the collaboration perspective, made China-Hungary relations a long-standing one, and the Prime Minister Orban led his team, the whole cabinet, as well as the country, to sustain and to continuously pursue this friendly policy towards China, and it's vice versa.
For several consecutive years, Chinese companies have topped the ranking of foreign investors in Hungary. And among the Chinese invested projects, a landmark one is the Hungary-Serbia Railway, which we know represents the first high-speed railway built by Chinese companies in Europe. What do you expect this railway or this program to bring to Hungary?
It is very important and it is a strategic project for Hungary. As I said, Hungary is a landlocked country, so connectivity defines its economic ceiling and its future development. So this railway strengthens Hungary's position as a logistic gateway or hub between Southern Europe and Central Europe. This is for its long-term development for sure. And also it can provide Hungary as a distribution center linking the Balkans countries with Austria, with Germany, and beyond. So go beyond to the West Europe. So if this railway can be developed and fully integrated into its regional supply chains, it can definitely shorten the transit times, for the goods and reduce significantly the logistics costs, and also enhance Hungary's attractiveness and accessibilities for further and future manufacturing investments globally. So I think the country needs this. In addition, for the country to position itself an EV and battery production hub, they need the supply chain to be very complete, and they need this transportation to be as easy as possible, as faster as possible. And that while with the railway being there, it positions itself as a very reliable hub and the transition hub for this directly link for this industrial competitiveness.
Okay. Another well-known Chinese invested project in Hungary is BYD's electric vehicle factory, which recently began its trial production. Since you have already mentioned about, say, EVs or EV batteries, at a time when certain European countries are viewing China's EV industry with a sense of alert, for example, why do you think Hungary is actually embracing it?
I think Hungary is embracing BYD's electric vehicle factory is not a one-time offering for Chinese collaboration of Chinese partnership. It's not accidental at all. I think it reflects its ambition to do the economic calculation, economic development, using its development of its own industrial strategy. And also it presents a very strong political signal as to this within the broader European constraints. Hungary can be independent, and Hungary's decision on this strategic partnership can be very independent. In terms of its industrial logical, as I just mentioned, Hungary wants to be an EV hub. Hungary has already prepared the different projects to make itself an EV hub. And to be an EV hub, you have to have some very symbolic as well as substantial partnership. And the BYD presents to be a leading EV manufacturing in the world. It's Hungary's actually honor and privilege to have a BYD to be setting up a factory there. And in terms of the economic competitiveness within Europe, it is very important because nowadays we can see that the EV competitiveness are ever strengthened. And Hungary's decision years ago to invite BYD is definitely they want to win in this internal competition as well. And in terms of political equation within Europe and or within Eurasia, I would say, this local production capacity within Hungary definitely increase its competitive advantage, not only within Europe, also between Hungary and other neighboring countries. It provides Europeans jobs in Hungary, not the other way around. It provides tax and revenue, and this tax revenue can be attributed to the EU also. Hungary definitely abide with these EU regulations as well, but Hungary made a step further. So these factors combined together makes Hungary, it's a natural decision, and they made it.
Now, some say the momentum in terms of China-Hungary cooperation, especially economic cooperation, will have a demonstrative effect for Europe. However, some say this is actually creating divisions between Hungary and some of the other member countries of the European Union. Hanhua, what is your take on this?
Yes, I do hear both interpretations on different opinions on this particular, Hungary-China partnership or this friendship. Because in our think tank discussions, we can see so many different opinions towards, even within Hungary, I would say. But definitely Prime Minister Orban embrace I would like to say, interests go first strategy. If there is interest, I think Minister Orban can take it very ambitiously. So, in my opinion, China-Hungary cooperation can have very demonstrative effect, if I may say so. It can generate friction within the EU, definitely. But the real question is whether it ultimately contributes to European diversification or European fragmentation, because Europe's economy as a whole is struggling, especially after the Ukraine crisis. This is the fact. So whether it can be a pragmatic solution for Hungary to embrace this partnership to be more realistic, it's a question not only towards Hungary but also towards many major powers in Europe. Just recently, they have this business summit while the German chancellor and the French president, they hold different voices towards how to embrace China's partnership, how to embrace China's cooperation. One is calling for more autonomy, more strategic autonomy, but the other said that we need to embrace China more because the business opportunities, the both powers collaborate can present more opportunities and generate more revenues as well. So Hungary is presenting a very strong test case in this sense. It shows that Chinese investment can operate within EU's regulatory framework and it can operate well. And also, this industrial and infrastructure cooperation can be localized against some of the arguments that the Chinese infrastructure building or China's industrial cooperation can be a damage to these localized EU operations. Also, this engagement, I mean, the engagement between China and Hungary does not necessarily mean the policy alignment on all the geopolitical issues. Certainly, China and Hungary has some alignment on some geopolitical issues, but definitely not on all the different foreign policies, but we are all very realistic. So this is a very strong test case to show to other EU countries that economically viable, compliant, and beneficial to local employment. Why not go ahead and give it a try and see what kind of revenues can we generate together and whether it can be a win-win situation and whether this win-win situation can bring the real benefits to the people.
Definitely, that represents the ideal situation for international relations. By the way, talking about China-Hungary relationship from another dimension, we know under Prime Minister Viktor Orban, Hungary has, of course, on one hand, managed to force great ties with China. But on the other hand, Orban also enjoys a pretty good relationship with US President Donald Trump. How would you look at such a scenario? Does a good relationship with the current administration of the White House necessarily means that Prime Minister Orban has to some extent, sacrifice his country's close ties with China?
My understanding is Orban, as Hungary's prime minister, is conducting or emphasizing independent foreign policy or decision-making process over his own preference. He can be good friends with Chinese Foreign Minister Wang Yi. He can be good friends with Trump himself, but at the end of the day, he will do his own calculation and whether this kind of relationship of friendship can benefit to its own nation's development and its own people's interests. I think this is his, the principle of his calculation. So it can be called the national interest calculation rather than this ideological alignment. So from this perspective, having or developing some good ties with the United States do not automatically preclude the cooperation with China. And also, the engagement with China does not mean a strategic rivalry with the United States. Same applies to his relationship with Russia, and also he is member of the EU. So this is not a hedging, narrow financial senses or calculation. I think it's just a strategic diversification given the ever turbulent geopolitical tensions. And he, in his calculation or in his formula, he's also taking economic development into consideration. And it's not about the short-term development, because when we talk about the EV factories, when we talk about railroads, they are involving with this much longer term and strategic movement. So he has to take longer economic development into his formula of calculation. And also, the security concerns are growing more and more for almost every country. So you have to, when you make some business decisions, you also have to take the security, not today's security, but the security in the longer term into consideration as well. I think Orban did quite well in this regard as well. So in terms of economic development, in terms of security, Beijing is a key investor. Beijing is definitely the most important industrial partner. Washington probably can be a security anchor, especially in terms of the transatlantic relations. Washington and Beijing can both play some political partnership and present some political assessment and assurance for Hungary as well. So yeah, this is Albans' consideration in my humble opinion.
Well, thank you very much for joining us. Han Hua, co-founder and Secretary General of Beijing Club for International Dialogue. This is World Today. Stay tuned. You are listening to World Today. I'm Ding Hen in Beijing. China has successfully completed a launch test of the country's new generation heavy-lift rocket and manned spacecraft, marking a key step forward for the country's lunar program. The test on board the Menzhou crew carrier was designed to ensure that astronauts could be safely returned to Earth if something went wrong during the launch. The test also featured the first flight and a controlled vertical splashdown of a Long March 10 carrier rocket. The rocket is currently being developed to launch Chinese astronauts to the moon. So joining us now on the line is Dr. Zhang Fan, Associate Professor of Astronomy with Beijing Normal University. Thank you very much for joining us.
Hello.
So, according to the China Manned Space Engineering Office, the test successfully verified the functional performance of the rocket's first stage ascent and recovery phases, as well as the maximum dynamic pressure escape and recovery of the spacecraft. Why is it important to verify those functional performances?
So basically, it's two separate tests being bundled together. It's more cost effective and it's more sort of pushed quickly on the schedule. So basically, there's a spacecraft and a rocket. Together, they will form the fundamental workhorses for the China's manned program. So they will be taking Chinese astronauts into the Chinese space station, on regular tours of duty. And also, as you mentioned in your introduction, they will be taking Chinese astronauts to the moon before 2030. So it is vital that they not only sort of get tested, they get tested thoroughly and on a rapid time scale as well.
So how is the latest test different from the ground level safety test that was conducted in June last year?
So that test on the spacecraft escape system was basically to ensure everything works from a mechanical point of view. For example, the solid rockets, they actually light up and take the the spacecraft away from whatever the exploding rocket or anything. It can go up really quickly, and then it would separate from the spacecraft, and then the spacecraft, the parachutes would deploy properly, and some air cushions would deploy properly to ensure safety of the astronauts. So basically, last year everything was tested so that it works, but this time it's something called the maximum dynamical pressure, or max Q test. So when your rocket is going through the air, at some stage it picks up enough speed, but the air is still quite thick, so you're puncturing through thick air with fast speed. So that gives you a lot of vibrations and stuff. That's when it's most dangerous for the rocket for something bad to happen to the rocket. And also, this is a very stressful situation for the escape system to work. So this time, the test is to make sure that under this very stressful, the most possible stressful situation, the whole system, escape system, actually works. So this is the robustness test in a way.
Okay, I take a point. So the test also marks the first, successful attempt by any Chinese rocket to return to Earth safely. Currently, we know only the United States has, operational reusable rockets. So what is the test to tell us about China's ongoing efforts to develop, reusable rockets?
So this is the fundamental sort of bottleneck, choke point for developing a low Earth orbit economy. There are a lot of things that's envisioned that could happen in low Earth orbit. For example, you can have vast satellite constellations that provide internet services to any places that doesn't have a fiber optics cable being laid down. You can imagine for poorer areas on Earth that would really make a difference. Also, there's the possibility of putting solar panels up there to generate electricity more efficiently, or even AI compute centers up there. And also manufacturing in space because of the low gravity and a variety of other advantages. For example, high vacuum, that's very good for precision measurement, precision manufacturing. So for that to actually happen, you need to be able to launch stuff into space at a low cost. So right now, the reusable sort of rockets that other countries can do lowers the cost to something below $3,000 per kilogram. And China needs to get there for its own sort of low Earth orbit economy to take off. So right now there's this one, Long March 10. There's also Long March 12. There's Zhuque 3, developed by both the state sector and the private sector. So this year actually we will see a lot of these tests.
So now that the latest test is successful, what other crucial tests is it paving the ways for the foreseeable future?
So later on in this year, the same combination of the spacecraft and same sort of rocket, but the full stack. Right now is sort of simplified version. The full stack of this combination will be launched without human, but in a full sort of human capable configuration, and it will launch the Mengzhou spacecraft into orbit, and it will dock with the Chinese space station. So it's almost as if it's on a regular tour up there, and plausibly the recycling of the rocket itself would happen in a more mature manner. So this time they didn't actually capture the rocket because it's the very first test. You don't want to blow up the ship that's trying to capture it. So the rocket actually landed just next to the barge. So next time probably the test will go ahead a bit further. So fully recapture of the rocket. And also for going to the moon, you also need a lander. Not just taking people there. Once the people get there, they will transfer onto a lander that goes to the surface of the moon and back up. So that thing is currently so the preliminary model has been developed, but the production, the sort of flight model, is currently being put together. They haven't announced any specific test schedules, but this year it will be they're vigorously putting things together, sort of system integration happening, and obviously the other sort of the crew capsule being ready really put a sort of push the other program that they need to move fast.
Okay, I take your point. So very, very briefly, in a sentence or two, are you optimistic that China will be able to send astronauts to the moon by 2030?
I think they're on schedule. They're actually, I think they're a little bit ahead of schedule. For example, the Long March 10 version that will go to the moon is not actually as advanced as the one being tested just yesterday. That one isn't reusable. It doesn't need to be. You just need to, because when you reuse it, you need to use fuel to come back down. But when we go to the moon, you just want to use all the fuels for pushing stuff out as far as possible. So I think everything is on track.
Okay. Thank you very much for joining us, Dr. Zhang Fan, Associate Professor of Astronomy, joining us from Beijing Normal University. You are listening to World Today. We'll be back after a very short break. You are back with World Today. I'm Ding Hen in Beijing. China has urged Lithuania to adhere to the One China principle and stand on the right side of history. A spokesperson for Taiwan Affairs Office of the State Council made a remark in response to the Lithuanian Prime Minister's recent admission of a major policy mistake concerning China. Inga Ruginiani has publicly acknowledged that opening the so-called Taiwan Representative Office in Vilnius was a strategic mistake. She described the move as, quote, jumping in front of a train and lost, unquote. The Lithuanian leader indicates that the office could be renamed as the Taipei Representative Office, signaling openness to improving ties with China. So for more, my colleague Xu Yawen spoke with Dr. Zhang Xing, Deputy Director with the Center for Russian Studies, East China Normal University.
Professor Zhang, Lithuania's new Prime Minister Inga Ruginiene has called the opening of the so-called Taiwan Representative Office a strategic mistake, while Beijing has reiterated that adherence to the One China principle is the political foundation for bilateral ties. In your view, what factors are driving Lithuania's new government's change of tone here? Is this shift mainly about domestic politics or a broader geopolitical recalculation?
Part of it, I think, is attributable to the domestic politics of Lithuania, because the new government is under Social Democratic, and the Social Democratic Party traditionally has been less confrontational with China. And the opening of the so-called Taiwan Affairs Office was adopted by the government under a center-right, more conservative party. So I think that's part of the reason for the Prime Minister's changing stance. But also, I think from a longer perspective, I think the Lithuanian government, regardless of the nature of governing parties, also see the consequences of holding such a policy, playing with the naming of the representative office of Taiwan in Lithuania, realize the increasing so-called costs associated with that kind of policy, and also that policy in particular, as the Prime Minister of Lithuania emphasized, is not in line with neither with the EU nor with the current United States government's policy. So as a relatively small country, they also see the necessity to align their policies more closely with both EU and the United States. I think those are the three sets of reasons.
While Lithuania's prime minister is seeking to repair its relations with China, its president has taken a tougher line here, demanding mutual respect and warning against what he calls risks of close ties with Beijing. How do these mixed signals within Lithuania's leadership affect the credibility of its outreach, and to what extent are domestic political divisions shaping its foreign policy reset?
Yes, there is obviously some mixed signals from the different parties, representatives of different parties, as well as from the president versus the message from the prime minister. And that's part of Lithuania's domestic politics. Political leaders of different political parties have a different stance on their response to the Taiwan office. As well as a broader relation with China. This part of the story, but also what we have seen so far is even after the Prime Minister has made such a open acknowledgement of making a mistake, so far the Lithuanian government haven't done much beyond verbal expression stance. The office is still there. The name has not been changed. So that's also a part of the mixed signal. And then overall, it seems the Lithuanian government and the political establishment was not in a position to fundamentally change or readjust its policy towards either mainland China or towards Taiwan. So those are the. So we've seen some. We might say positive message from the Prime Minister so far, but it's maybe still a little bit too much to expect to see 180-degree change in its in Lithuania's official policy towards either mainland China or towards Taiwan.
Professor, China's Taiwan Affairs Office has reiterated that the One China principle is an international consensus and urging Lithuania to correct their mistakes and return to the right track of history. So will renaming the office be enough to address Beijing's core concerns? And what other steps need to be taken for Lithuania to fully normalizing bilateral relations with China?
The renaming the office to a Taipei Representative Office will be the necessary first step. The next steps will be way beyond just the naming of this office. Because in the past few years, we see Lithuania as I would say, a major actor in the Baltic and also in the Central Eastern Europe, been the probably most active actor on a national level to try to cozy up its relation with with Taiwan, and in more than one cases, directly or indirectly, sort of challenging the One China policy. So I think the renaming the Taipei Representative Office is one step, but itself is not enough to, as you mentioned, meet China's core concerns, as well as be the necessary step to formally normalize bilateral relation between China and Lithuania. I think more is necessary. Overall, I think the Lithuanian state needs to make it very clear it's stick with the One China policy 100%, and does not try to play with this so-called Taiwan policy or One China policy.
And lastly, Professor Zhang, what's your outlook for the trajectory of Sino-Lithuania bilateral relations? And more broadly, what lessons might other nations learn from Lithuania's experience?
Overall, I would say I would expect to see the new Lithuanian government make further steps in order to, for one, to address China's core concern. For two, is to try to normalize bilateral relations. The drive to normalize bilateral relations in the past few years are definitely building up, and the pressure to normalize the bilateral relations within Lithuania not only comes from state officials, but also come from different sectors of the Lithuanian economy and Lithuanian society. And then there's also push from EU and from the United States for Lithuania to make more efforts to normalize its relation with China. So I think that in the immediate run, I will expect to see more efforts from the Lithuanian government, regardless of the nature of the ruling party, try to normalize, repair and normalize relation with China. And then that efforts would probably set a example for some other international actors who have made similar tries in the past few years, playing with the Taiwan question or the One China policy. It's a good lesson for them to also to learn and to follow what the new Lithuanian government has been doing and will continue to do. So it's a good lesson.
Dr. Zhang Xing, Deputy Director with the Center for Russian Studies at East China Normal University, speaking with my colleague Xu Yawen. Coming up, breaking with President Trump, U.S. House votes to pass a bill ending Canada tariffs. This is World Today. We'll be back.
Welcome. I am Chu Zhang, Deputy Director at the Center for Middle Eastern Studies at Fudan University. On the World Today program, we will dive beyond the headlines to uncover the stories, trends, and impacts that connect states across the globe. Join me on World Today.
You're listening to World Today. I'm Ding Hen in Beijing. The U.S. House of Representatives has passed a resolution to terminate President Donald Trump's use of emergency powers to impose tariffs on Canadian goods. The measure is challenging President Trump's claim that Canada poses a drug-related national security threat. The resolution is moving to the Senate, which has twice voted to block the tariffs. However, the bill is going to face an almost certain presidential veto, and overriding it would require two-thirds majorities in both chambers. President Donald Trump has warned of consequences for the Republicans opposing him, insisting that Canada represents one of the worst trading partners. So joining us now on the line is Professor Qu Bo, Director of the Institute of International Relations, China Foreign Affairs University. Thank you very much for joining us.
My pleasure of joining the discussion.
So why do you think we have seen 6 Republicans crossing party lines to vote with Democrats in this particular bill?
So I think there are several reasons. And the first reason, and especially for many established Republicans, they are really concerned Donald Trump has been abusing the International Emergency Power Act. So we know, according to U.S. Constitution, the right on tariffs and actually belong to the Congress. But from the World War I and the United States, the Congress tried to delegate certain rights, authority to the president, and especially to access economic power over the other countries. And from the 1970s, and the U.S. Congress passed the International Economic Emergency Powers Act and gave more power to the president over tariffs. So we know Donald Trump is really, I think he used to using the power. So I think for the Republicans, especially for established Republicans, they're really concerned Donald Trump is abusing the power. And second, I think from the 1970s, for the Republicans, most of Republicans, they much more prefer free trade, and they really think the tariff is a bad thing. And for some of these Republicans, and they believe tariffs have been a net negative for the economy, U.S. economy, and are a significant tax that American consumers, manufacturers, and farmers are paying. So I think this is the second reason, and especially they do not like Donald Trump to impose tariffs over their allies, and they believe that really hurt the United States' credibility of commitment to their allies, and for the long run, that will reduce the U.S. hard power and soft power.
Okay, so this vote in the House actually came as the United States is, entering its pivotal midterm election season. Primary is due to begin in March. Do you think the results of the particular vote here is shedding any light on the key issues and the prospects of the midterm elections?
I don't think the tariff will become a very key issue for the midterm election. And we know the majority of Republicans, they binding themselves to President Donald Trump. So I think almost the majority of the Republicans, if they try to win the re-election, and they have to support the tariff policy of Donald Trump. But we can see there is another very key issue that is about economic issue will be the key factor, will influence the midterm election. And I think from this May, when Donald Trump will have his the chairperson for the Federal Reserve, and the United States will start a new interest rate cutting cycle. And I think that will pump the money into the economy, and that will give much more dynamics for the re-election for the Republicans. So I think almost the Republican Congress persons, they have to comply to Donald Trump's tariff policy. So the tariff just partly the Democrats will against that, but for the Republicans, they will fully support Donald Trump's trade policy.
But still, the party line exists regarding the tariff issue, I guess. So, as we know, President Trump claims he is repeating his claim that Canada has taken advantage of the United States on trade for many, many years. Is that the case in your observation, Professor?
No, I don't think so. And if we look at the relation between the United States and Canada, they have the world's most comprehensive trade relations and support millions of jobs in each country. So, for example, like $3 billion worth of goods and service cross borders each day in last year. So the United States is the largest trading partner for Canada in goods and service, and Canada is the second largest trading partner for the United States. And many of these goods are involve co-investing and co-development. So Canada and the United States also have a significant investment relationship. So the United States is the largest investor in Canada. Canada is the second largest investor in the United States. And if you look at the trade between the United States and Canada, although in total, in terms of goods and service, the Canada enjoy kind of trade surplus, and the United States had the trade deficit. But in terms of goods or manufactured goods trade between the United States and Canada, from the 1980s, the mid-1980s, and actually Canada import more and export less goods to the United States. So the Canada is one of the most important trade partner for the United States. Besides that, and the Canada is one of the largest the energy supplier to the United States, as well as support the manufacturer supply chain to the United States almost across all key sectors of the economy. So I think Donald Trump is totally incorrect about that.
Okay, so faced with the pressure from President Donald Trump, Canada is nowadays seeking to diversify its trading and other relationships away from the United States. However, this move has actually triggered further, unhappiness or unpleasure on the part of President Trump. For example, he recently threatened to impose a 100% tariff on Canadian goods over a proposed trade deal between China and Canada. How should Canada cope with a situation like that?
So as allies to the United States, as one of the important economic partner to the United States, and Canada has to make their choice. And I think to diversify their trade partner, I think that is a good choice. And then you have to confront the United States bully or coercive economic measures to Canada. But this is a short term. And so I think not just the United States allies or other countries, and just like trying to say, one countries have relations to establish the relations, and the relation need to build on equality, right? We should have a mutual respect. If you do not respect us, and we have to diversify, we have to go other places. So I think this is a short-term issue. And if the U.S. allies could take action together to take collective action, and that I think that will track and balance the U.S. Abusing their power.
Okay, your point's well taken. But thank you very much for joining us today, Professor Qu Bo, Director of the Institute for International Relations with China Foreign Affairs University. This is World Today. Stay tuned. You're back with World Today. I'm Ding Hen in Beijing. A prominent historian says Washington's aggressive rhetoric is fundamentally eroding transatlantic trust Adam Tooze, professor of history and director for the European Institute with Columbia University, made a remark in a conversation with my colleague Tian Wei. He emphasized that Europe's real path forward lies in expanding energy, renewable energy, and moving towards jointly financed, debt-backed military spending. Let's take a listen.
The issue of energy is for real.
Yes.
How do you see the element of energy, lifeline for Europe to prosper, played in this transatlantic relationship, for now at least?
Oil for the Europeans is a stable thing. Europe has been saturated with oil for decades. It's not a booming market. We're really talking about electricity generation. And so we're talking about the trade-off really between gas, wind, solar, and batteries. Right. Those are the real options. And what the Europeans realized during the Ukraine conflict is the dependence on pipelined Russian gas was very risky for them because of the geopolitics. And there was a lurch towards two things: accelerate renewables, solar and wind, in using large quantities of Chinese solar panels to do the solar build-out. Wind is different, that's done more domestically, and buying American LNG. And the president, with his pro-American oil and gas producers hat on, is a export gas president. He goes around the world doing these giant LNG deals, and the Europeans side up to one. The problem is that he's also a low energy cost for American consumers president, which is totally in conflict with his commitment to the interests of the American oil producers. And so with that hat on, he's let's go and take control of Venezuelan oil and pump that into the market and help to bring oil prices down. And so there's as with so many things in the Trump project, there's these deep contradictions between, his commitment to energy dominance and what does it really mean? Does that mean cheap energy for American consumers or big markets for American producers? Opening up the big market for American producers might reduce the pressure on the American market, but there's very little coherence in his thinking about these basic issues, which is not just a Trump problem. It's a conflict inherent in America's situation that it is a oil power and a gas power, both as a producer and a consumer. And that puts you constantly in conflict with yourself.
But the question really is, how is Europe likely as a continent to deal with the choking point of energy supply?
The solution is new energy types. I mean, that's the direction. They made promises to Trump, they're not going to keep them. The promises they made to Trump I thought this was us, the Europeans, engaging in fake news, because there's no central gas purchasing agency in Europe that can say, yes, we will buy hundreds of billions of dollars of American gas. European firms, European generators decide how much gas they take. So the actual solution is going to be a renewable build-out.
Another question is the arms race. So how is this branch of issues, which we do not discuss often, just say a year ago, now become such an important component of the overall picture in terms of business interests?
They're very considerable and in urgency. I think that's the crucial thing. We're not really talking about big business. Once upon a time, you would have said the military-industrial complex was a large piece of the global economy. Nowadays, compared to big tech or the really big banks, it's small scale. But it's crucial for national security. It's crucial for survival. And at the high end, it intersects with technologies like AI and cloud security when you suddenly get into the really big budgets. But what we are seeing is a scramble, and this goes to the question that preoccupies so much of the West, is our diminished ability to make things. And the explosive quality of that question is that China, of course, has emerged as the dominant manufacturing power of the 21st century. And so you see this national security anxiety, fear about deindustrialization, the realization that China is the absolutely dominant manufacturing power, and then an argument within the politics of both Europe and America, we heard it from the president, about how you handle the distributional costs of a big armaments ramp up. I mean, Trump has been talking about 1.5 trillion, crazy numbers, he likes the big numbers, but more seriously, the Germans are pushing the share of defense spending in their GDP towards 4%, quite systematically, and that will generate a very substantial new market. The problem for the Europeans is, as always, can they agree to do it together? Or are we going to get a series of rivalrous projects, or are we going to get projects which are ultimately dependent on American technology for the really high-end stuff, which is missiles?
We have been seeing some interesting signs in rhetorics, at least. For example, about the Anti-Coercion Act.
Yes.
For example, about technology sovereignty. For example, about whether to purchase or not technologies coming from the US that might have a huge impact on European security, or vice versa, whether Europeans want to share those technologies, drones, for example, with the United States. So what do you make of these, shall I say, flowing on the surface suggestions?
Yes.
Are they really serious, or are they just tricks being thrown out for negotiation's sake?
I mean, I think that they are negotiating ploys, but as in any relationship, the harder the talk, the more aggressive the talk, the more deeper values begin to erode. And I think we are definitely at the point now where that tactical moving, the kind of aggressive actions that people are showing and the rhetoric that's being deployed is eating away at the trust which underpins the entire relationship. You cannot describe your relations, say, as the Americans have with the Europeans in recent weeks, without fundamentally undermining the willingness of other people to work with you. And you could see the shock in President Macron of France, when he said it would be crazy if the anti-coercion instrument, which was intended for use against Russia and, let's face it, against China, over rare earths, for instance, that's what the Europeans imagined coercion to look like, if it would have to be actually used for the first time against the United States. And that level of kind of disbelief almost is beginning to move through the European system and change attitudes in quite a deep way.
Having said that, though, whether those so-called suggestions is going to resolve the crisis you are facing today, I mean, the Europeans are facing today, it's a big question. You have very long legal process. Yes. And you need to have all the capitals to agree on that.
Yes.
And also you need to have enough next step to deal with if there were actually reactions coming from Washington. Yes. So have Europeans been thinking about all of these every step of the way, or this is just, let's talk about this?
Europe is a very unusual thing in that it's a political system that is making itself up in history. It is not simply a given thing, but something that has to be created. And as one famous European, Jean Monnet, said, Europe is the series of answers we have given to the crisis that we have collectively faced. And what we're seeing on defense with Ukraine and the threat of American withdrawal from Europe is a sudden willingness on the part of all of the key players in Europe to consider, for instance, common financing by debt of military spending. And those are the sorts of moves to look for. In this kind of ratchet, there are crucial thresholds which you cross, and when you cross them, it changes the game. It started with COVID, and it has now moved to anti-coercion instruments. It is now moving to common funding of defense. And those are the moves to trace in real time. Yeah. What Europe isn't is simply a fixed polity with a clear shape. That doesn't mean that it's not capable of developing in very, very powerful ways.
Right.
That was Adam Tooze, Professor of History and Director for the European Institute with Columbia University, talking with my colleague Tian Wei. That's all the time for this edition of World Today. I'm Ding He in Beijing. Thank you so much for listening. Bye for now.